Sister Christine Burke is a feminist theologian from Australia, but now based in the Philippines. Sister Chris came from a diocese where service was the mantra. But when she went to work for the Catholic bishops of Australia, she was introduced to a world that she felt was more consumed with status than service. Ever since, Sister Chris has been on a mission to teach feminist theology and shift a mindset that all too often only sees women as inferior. Sister Chris? Is that good? Yeah. Okay.
Australia is a long way away for most people. But I would have to tell you that in Australia, our churches are fairly empty, and they are certainly empty of the young. Those who remain are part of a fairly strong movement demanding significant change, because the extensive coverage of sexual abuse and leadership failure has disillusioned so many. My very limited observation of the church in the Philippines, there are many more young people participating. But I have to say it is a very much more patriarchal church, and maybe the abuse scandals have yet to explode. So, from where I come from, both contexts demand change. Now I want to build a bit on what Teresa was saying to us and look at a bit of history. The Holy Spirit, through the voices of women, has been seeking to enlighten church leadership for a long time. And I was reflecting on how we as religious women deal with situations. I think on the whole, we look at the needs, we discern whether this is what God's asking of us, and then we get down and do it. And sometimes we put the reasons around why we do it. And so today I wanted to share first of all with you the story of one woman who did just that, who saw needs, discerned that this was a call on her and those who followed her, and got down and did it, and talked strongly about women's role, and met a very tall brick wall. The woman I want to talk about is Mary Ward, who actually founded the congregation I belong to. But the reason that I'm giving her story is because I think she speaks to all of us in our situation today. 400 years ago, Mary Ward challenged the assumptions that religious women were incapable of fostering the faith of others. They were required to live in a cloister under the control of men. The amateur painting behind me obscures the reality that Mary was actually a person of joy, of friendship, of forgiveness, and people loved being around her. But I've chosen this painting because it illustrates something quite unique. As you can see, the face has been defaced. Her mouth has been removed. This was done by Nazi soldiers in the 1940s when they took over the convent in Würzburg in Germany. But their action is only a pale echo of what was done to this woman by the Pope and cardinals of her time. In the early 1600s, Mary Ward argued that women were not second class, but had been equally gifted by God, and they deserved good education. She urged her young followers to guard against a mindset which dismissed women as inferior. A priest had said, "They are but women." And she said, "To whom is the good Father comparing us, I presume, the other half of the human race, namely men, and in no way are we inferior. She claimed that women shared the responsibility to spread the message of Jesus. And she and her companions walked. She was an Englishwoman, and they were in Europe because of the Reformation. She walked from Belgium across Germany, across the Alps, down to Rome to present her case. But the system and those with power were against her. I think that anyone who seeks to change an entrenched culture cannot expect an easy ride. But then, changing an entrenched religious culture was what Jesus was on about. And we know that he did not have an easy ride. Despite evidence that her work was successful, Mary was condemned and imprisoned as a heretic. A papal proclamation in 1631 suppressed her institute. It stated that the ideas and actions that she was encouraging were poisonous growths in the Church of God and needed to be rooted out lest they spread themselves further. Mary wanted her group to be international, a female version of the Society of Jesus. This was condemned as unsuited to their weak sex and against female modesty. Because they dared to do things that men of learning only undertook with much difficulty, the Pope annulled their vows. He said, "We destroy and annul them, and we command the Christian faithful to regard them as suppressed, extinct, rooted out, destroyed, abolished." Strong words. The 200 women who shared her vision were turned out of their convents penniless in the middle of the 30 Years' War. A small group of her companions kept her flame alive, teaching but not recognized as religious. 100 years after her death, they were given permission to continue this work on condition that they made no reference to Mary Ward as their founder. Her mouth had been very firmly sealed. Books telling her story were burnt. Paintings of her life were to be removed from all the walls, so that the violence of Nazi soldiers is only a pale imitation of the harsh, blind, and deaf response of church officials. Yet the flame of the Holy Spirit is not easily quenched. 2 centuries later, many groups of women religious were recognized as apostolic. What was unimaginable in the 17th century was the norm by the 18th and 19th. Today, we here are gathering to challenge the same deeply rooted clericalist and patriarchal culture. We know that our daughters, nieces, granddaughters are not waiting around in the hope of change. They've walked away, unable to see how this organization, which does not recognize their potential, could give them life. If the church loses women, it loses the following generations. I think some of us are called to stay and to speak our truth because the rich web of the Christian faith is much more complex and rewarding than the clericalism that distorts it. But we cannot wait in passive silence. We know that women, lay and religious, are not less than men. We know that we can lead liturgies, we can work with others in decision-making, we can create networks of trust and belonging in parishes. When you look at our various countries, you can see we are already doing these things because they are needed. And we know we are called to this by God. There are some very clear examples of women acting with integrity and actually changing the expectations of both the leadership and the wider Christian community. The Leadership Conference of Women Religious in the USA refused to accept the ultimatum and the processes of curial officials. They insisted on discernment and dialogue, ending with a result which was not the head-on collision that we all expected, but in a sense a collaboration towards something new. So we have to find creative and reconciling ways to challenge the clericalism and patriarchy expressed in liturgy, in moral teaching on sexuality, and in structures. But I think we have the whole experience of the last 400 years to tell us that sometimes breaking away and doing something that leaves the church behind isn't the way. We have to find ways of both saying something and doing something new, and yet deeply holding to our tradition in where it makes sense. Pope Francis is naming clericalism and calling for a discerning synodal church. I think religious women have taken steps to declericalize. We've discerned new ministries, usually on the peripheries. We've handed over our very successful institutions to lay colleagues, and we work alongside them as equals. I challenge church leadership to listen to our experience and to learn from it. Mary Ward obeyed the Pope, accepted that she couldn't be considered a religious, and she forgave those who had sought to crush her, trusting that finally it was God's business to bring about what God wanted. But she did not give up. She believed her insights had come through the Holy Spirit, so she continued to gather the community, the remnant that remained, encouraging, guiding them. She obeyed the Pope, but she continued to walk a very tight tightrope between loyalty and integrity, because she perceived the truth that she was on about to be of God. And I think there are many examples all of us could quote of people who do that, whether it's the UISG here in Rome, who are teaching women the canon law to help them argue against misuse of power in the church, or other groups like that. But what I'd like to finish with is really the thought that underlying this struggle lies a deep theological issue. At the heart of the problem of a patriarchal church is the way we see God. If our image of God is of an old, white, powerful male hovering above the clouds, change will never happen. This graven patriarchal image has made God unbelievable in a scientific era. A white God has had a devastating impact on colonized peoples. A male-only God disillusions and angers women who recognize the way this undergirds the superiority of men. As theologian Elizabeth Johnson so eloquently argues, the symbol of God functions. It affects everything because it encompasses our deepest beliefs. Christians need to hear that this old man in the sky is not the Christian belief about God. Early Christian theologians, drawing on their own experience of God, elaborated a stunningly eloquent symbol of equality and difference held together and grounded in love. And they coined the word Trinity. They taught that the holy mystery of God beyond our knowing. The mystery of God is experienced in three expressions. Firstly, in the action of the Holy Spirit in our communities, drawing us together, drawing us to dialogue with the creation around us. Secondly, in the person of Jesus, who took flesh and came amongst us to tell us what the reign of God would really look like. And thirdly, in that inexpressible other that draws us beyond the limits of our horizons. As holy mystery, these three flow into each other in love, and their love opens out to all beings and all creation. As the physicists tell us, everything is connected. And our Christian God is deep communion, holy wisdom, the feminine name for God in the scriptures. And God is the connector, the attractor that holds together these three experiences in a circle dance of love. And that is the dance we are called to join. So I believe that one of the biggest challenges facing us as women and men in the church today is to come to know this God, to risk changing our language, allowing a new understanding of God to replace the distorting male-only image. We have to learn to listen to our times and to God speaking to us through our daily lives. Not a God of male power, but God as love, where equality and difference are held together. This is the image we must aim to live ourselves, and that we must call our church to embody. Change is desperately needed. And today, our voices of faith are being raised to name the fact that the exclusion of women is incomprehensible in the real world. So in this process, our challenge is to open ourselves to the mystery of God, that relationship which will teach us the next steps in this long and dark night. This image calls us to forgiveness and love, even for those who oppress us. So it rules out the destructive polarization in the public sphere which currently afflicts our church and our societies, needless to say. It also calls us to reach out to other faiths, to value the Amazon, to realize that our God can be met in a myriad of ways. But that calls us to be creative, to speak out, and yet to hold to the core of Jesus' message. And the Holy Spirit then can use our voices to shake the patriarchal assumptions that undermine Jesus' message today. Mary Ward's courage to speak out and to work for reconciliation was grounded in her relationship with God, her readiness to discern needs and to act. Let us ask for that same richness in our lives as lay and religious, so we too can live the image of a God we are calling our church to embody. And we do this knowing that changing an entrenched culture is not an easy ride, but it is the one we are called to live out. Thank you.